Just going to give a couple more minutes before I start.
Hello, good morning. Good
Anna.
afternoon.
Right, we've just passed the hour. I'll start going through the chair slides and things because at least we're going to spend a couple of minutes on those while other folks join us. So it's just me for the chair side this week. So it'd be helpful if others can help take notes as much as possible. I think Peter has offered to take notes, so that would be great. But if others can contribute, the link is in the chat. And I think, yes, Peter, you're presenting one of the presentations as well, so I'll try and make notes of you doing that. So we've got a 2-hour session today. We're going to focus on terminology, but first of all, we'll go through this standard note well. So I'll just give you a minute to read this. I think that most people who are participating should hopefully be familiar with this. But the key points is that this meeting is part of the IETF process, and anything you say or do in this meeting is a contribution to the IETF process, and you should be aware of what that means and things. And you can see the note well there on the screen, which you can read, and the various links and things like that. In particular, be aware that there's IPR implications by making a contribution or statement in here. It does have implications on your IPR. So if there's anything that where that could impact you, want to be careful that you know what the procedure is there. So let me just give you a minute to read that. And then the next one, the note really well. So I'm going to give you a chance to read this one. The basic premise here is that we are a professional organisation, and we try and treat each other with respect in terms of how we talk to each other and communicate, and both on lists and in these meetings and things like that. And hopefully that the Green Working Group should be fairly respectful. So just to note, this is that you're expected to be polite. And if you've got any concerns, then I suggest you raise them with the chairs initially, but there are other venues if you want to raise them as well. So be aware of that as well. But just please be polite during these meetings. So the core agenda today is we've got 2 hours. There's a quick intro. Hopefully I'll get through it in less than 10 minutes. I'll give a quick update on use cases. I've got 5 minutes down here, might be less. It depends on what sort of comments or discussion there is. One sort of change to the agenda that from what I announced previously, I sent it out today, is we've put 20 minutes for a framework discussion. Now, there was a framework discussion from the fillet list that Jan presented at the last IETF meeting, but there wasn't too much interest at that time. I think one of the key things that's changed here is that this framework has been reworked somewhat to be very focused on the green technologies and energy management. And I phrased some questions to the authors of things I thought were particularly important to discuss about this. And so I think Benoit's included those, and we'll try and tackle those questions. So I do think this is an important discussion to have, particularly because it may have a bearing on future discussions in terms of terminology and models. So I think there's some key questions about that, which is why I put it in there. We've then got the bulk of our time for terminology discussions today, but we can flex the time depending how it goes. Carlos is, I don't think he's presenting today. I think that Peter's presenting on his behalf, but he's written some slides suggesting a way forward of how to sort of combine a couple of terminology drafts that are there. So we can have a discussion about that. There's also Chin, again, I think, I'm not sure Chin's got time. So hopefully it's Jen Chen is presenting instead. on one particular drafts. So I give 20 minutes to each of those. And then there's some sort of general time for discussions as well. So for us to try and either work out a way forward and how we progress this, and or have discussion on the terminology terms today, so we can actually make concrete progress if you've got time and if there's interest. So that's good. And then lastly, we've got 10 minutes for future planning, next steps, and any wrap up. So does anyone want to do any agenda bashing or any changes to this agenda or any comments?
Well, actually, the Pijano's request was quite last minute, so I don't know if I can lead the discussion and actually part here to participate in this discussion.
Oh, fine. Okay. I think that, so in which case, if you have a chance to look through, otherwise I can quickly present his slides, because I think there's some interesting comments on there. So I think the slides are worth sharing and presenting anyway, and then we can flex the discussion if necessary. So if you don't feel confident, I can do that.
Yeah, thanks.
And then the last thing to say, in terms of the times here, I've allocated time for covering both sort of presentation and questions and discussion. So please be aware of that when you're presenting. I try and keep it on track. And then the next slide. So the use cases document, we talked about this briefly in IETF 122. The chairs would like to get a working group adopted document for use cases. And our goal here is to try and engage working consensus around the set of use cases. And there is still some discussion about use cases coming in. We held an adoption poll before IETF 122. There wasn't really enough support on the list for that or enough reviews and discussion. And it was noted that the document requires an editorial cleanup. So in addition to that, Carlos Bernardos, I don't know if he's online, yes he is, suggested maybe a structure for the use cases might be helpful, like a use case description, what's specific about the green working group related to that use case. And his suggestion was maybe requirements for green. I wasn't quite sure whether we want to put out requirements there. I guess both Diego and I were keen not to get sort of stuck too much into requirements, but I think there's a question here as to whether that could be a useful next step. Otherwise, do the authors have a view on how they'd like to progress this? Would they be able to update the document, at least do an editorial update? Would other members be able to review the document on a list so we can get some progress and actually get an adoption poll that we can then get this adopted and check consensus on it? Time for any thoughts or questions, please. Yes, Carlos.
Yeah, from my side, can you hear me well?
You're a little bit quiet on my side.
Better now?
That's okay.
Okay, so thanks. From my side, I think, of course, since I'm suggesting the structure, I think it will be good to have at least some kind of homogeneous structure, whatever it is. That's my proposal, but any other thing would fit. But I think it's good for consistency to have a structure for documenting the use cases. I'm also on the side of including the requirements, but again, that's personal opinion. I know you guys prefer not to do it, but to me, I think one of the good reasons to have a use cases document is to also try to derive some requirements. But again, that's personal opinion, and I think I haven't discussed that with the other authors or co-authors of this document. But I think we should do this if we agree to follow a structure to reorganize the text and to do an editorial tidy up of this, and then eventually call for some additional reviews on the document. And if the sentiment is that the document is on the right track, maybe do the adoption call at that time. That will be my proposal.
Mahesh?
Yeah, I agree with Carlos on specifically the idea of at least specifying what is green about some of the use cases. I did go through the use cases, and for the ones that I felt were out of charter of the working group, maybe those should be moved somewhere else so it's clear what are the use cases we are considering. I think there are clearly some that I feel at this point they are not within the charter of the working group.
And yes, I think it's key that we're only covering things that are in the charter. Marisol, are you speaking on behalf of the authors here? Marisol?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not sure if on behalf of the authors, I hope so. But we were okay to modify the structure. The problem has been the time, but we agree that we were happy to review agree on the comments from Carlos, right? We didn't decide on that structure or any other similar, but now Carlos is also part of the authors on the version 01, and we can work on it.
And my ideal here is I don't want to push on time too much. It'd be nice if we can get an update over the next 2 or 3 weeks, so there's a chance for folks to review it and read it before IETF 123. Because I think it'd be really good to get this sort of adopted as a document within the working group, so we can then sort of settle on this and move forward. And it's easy to then have discussions about additional requirements because it's in the framework of that document. So is that something that's plausible? I know it's a time constraint.
I think we are open to do. We are collaborating as well on this framework proposal, and Benoit will present. And there is a good momentum, I guess, now to speed up on the revisions that might be needed before Madrid.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. Gentian?
Yeah, thank you. So I have a small comment here. Actually, when I look at some of the use cases, such as a fixed network, we have some definitions. We have something there in use case for fixed network, but we don't know the scope of this fixed network. If there's only routers or transmission equipments and something else should be involved. So maybe we need to clarify a bit on the scope. That's my comment. Thank you.
And it'd be ideally if you could send that comment to the list, to the authors on the list. I think it'd be great to start sort of trying to encourage discussion on the list on these things, because then I think again will drive the document forward. If we can get sort of discussion on the list and reaching a conclusion.
Sure,
if that's
sure.
possible.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So if there's no more questions on this bit, we'll wrap this up and we'll move on to the next part. So Benoit, I think it's you up next. Yes, you're right.
All right, very good. So on behalf of the authors, I would like to present the latest revisions of the framework for energy efficiency management. So thanks to the author, we work on a couple of revisions lately. So pretty good. Let me go to the next slide. So what are the objectives? So you mentioned, Rob, that you asked 3 valid questions to the authors. So let me repeat them here and read them because they were only sent to the authors. So the chairs ask, why is the framework necessary and important? Specifically, how does this differ from general network management framework? So we're going to address this one. Second question, why is it critical to discuss agree on a framework now rather than deferring to a later task within the working group? So can we just focus on simply device monitoring and we'll speak about the framework later? We're going to address this now. And what impact does having a framework have on the structure of the energy efficiency Yang models? So we're going to allude to this, but before going there, we must agree on a couple of concepts. And those concepts are going to create new terms. So those terms could be in the terminology section or in the framework. It doesn't matter too much, but we need to agree on the direction. By the way, feel free to interrupt at any point in time. This is the green reference model as discussed during the BOF discussion. So at the top, we've got the network domain level. In the middle, number 2, and I've got no pointer, but I will try to guide you. Number 2, we've got like the controller, which collects, compute, and aggregates. At the bottom, we've got device and component levels. And we have different types of device. A network device, great, but also a component within a device, and also a legacy network device which has no monitoring capabilities. And we've got also the last type, which is the PoE device. Now, from the controller down to the device component, during the above discussion, we identified D, E, F, and G. So the D is what can we learn in terms of inventory capabilities. The interface E is what can we monitor, for example, the traffic and power consumption. And it was mentioned that the focus of the Green Working Group is F and G, where F is like, can I monitor the power proportion, energy efficiency, etc. And interface G, can I control anything on the device, like hibernate, power states, low energy mode, whatever. And look at the direction of the arrows. Now, if we look at the network domain level, we've got like similar things. The inventory of identity capabilities for network, you will see that this is becoming important. Then interface B, we can be monitoring the energy efficiency of the entire network. And C, the data sheets, that's something that we mentioned, like to start with, we might need to have a data sheet, a database, or as you will see, we might be needing an API to set metadata for the device and components. Now, in this presentation, we want to focus on the lower part, at the bottom of the controller, southbound of the controller. If you see, let me go back to the previous slide. There are 4 interfaces, D, E, F, and G. So now that we've got the working group, a green working group, we could combine those to interface D. What can we learn from the devices? Interface E, what can we monitor in terms of power, efficiency, ratio, any of the metrics we're going to design or to specify in this working group? The interface F is the same one as before. What can we control? Great, so we took this reference model and we're going to see it for a couple of examples. The first one is a basic power supply. So I have a router or a PC and I take power and energy from a wall outlet. And if you look at the bottom in the nodes, if you see like the pound sign, which is between power supply and device component, this denotes a transfer of energy. While the arrows, which are always vertical in this drawing, denotes a transfer of information. And you will see that having this transfer of energy, the topology of the energy is important because it doesn't map to the transfer of information at all. Now, if I have this power supply at the bottom with a legacy device, a legacy device is in this case a device on which I cannot do any monitoring. But to get the energy efficiency of the network, I still would like to know how much energy, power, demand it needs. So I would be adding a physical meter in the middle. And I would have an interface E, which is like sending me, if I'm the controller, all the power, energy, demands, or whatever ratio metrics you have. Great. Now, if I want to have a view of my entire network, then I must know that this physical meter here in my drawing, which by the way, I mentioned as energy object 1, and I put everything which is new terms in blue. So I must know that this energy object 1 is a meter that reports on behalf of this energy object 2, which is the legacy device. I must know this relationship. And this is called the metering relationship. And there is, if you know CDP or LLDP, there is no LLDP over energy distribution. So you cannot deduce it. You cannot automate this. you must set it with an API. It's a manual process, but it's important. So already like 2 new terms here. Now, the goal of this working group is to get energy efficient network. So maybe in my network, I just change this legacy device with the new device or component, the energy object 2 in the drawing there. Now I still have my physical meter, but this new device allows me to report, but also to be controlled. Now, what is the issue here? The issue is that we must be avoiding double counting. So I've got 2 ways to measure: location X or location Y. So the physical meter is the object 1 and the device object 2. Now, it would be a huge mistake for the controller or the network domain level to just sum up everything it knows, because in this case, you'd be double counting. So what does it mean? It means that I must know, again, that this physical meter is actually reporting on behalf of this component. If I know this, I will avoid this issue of double counting. Now, the power over Ethernet. I asked a couple of times whether PoE was inside the charter or not. The last time was to Tony Lee when he was presenting the Yang module. I asked, is PoE part of your module? He said, yes, obviously. So in the case of PoE, at the bottom, we've got a device switch. So a switch, and each port would give power over Ethernet to a PoE endpoint. It could be a camera, an access point, you name it. In this case, I've got the same issue of double counting. Now we've got the interface, two new definitions: power outlet on the switch, on the port, and power inlet on the PoE device. And by the way, those 2 are just definition of power interface. Now, we know about double counting. It's the same one as before. Now there is an issue number 2, is who controls what? In this case, I could be giving power directly from the switch port to the access point, for example. I want to switch off the port on the switch, no more power to the access point, it goes down. Great. So I have the device port, the switch port, which is actually has the ability to control a different device, the access point, right? So whenever I want to report on all my endpoints, I have to know this relationship, because maybe it's a day off today and I want to switch off all the access points. Great. So I must know this power source relationship, again, a new term. Now, what you see is that the PoE endpoint could also have an F interface, which is to set power states, because I could go directly on the access point now and say, you know what, I want you to go into a different low energy mode, right? This is also possible. Now I've got 2 ways to control this PoE endpoint. By the way, in the use case, this PoE is called, it's a use case of indirect energy monitoring and control. So those 2 differences, the double counting, which means that we must have the metering relationship, and who controls what, which means that we must have the power source relationship. These are key differences with typical networks, networking frameworks. This was your first question, Rob. Now, we could have different variation of this. If we take a smart PDU, typically a smart PDU, you put this in the top, you put it in a rack, and you're going to provide energy and power to all the servers in the rack, right? And then you've got like an API to the smart PDU, and you could be you would be having all the metering information. Now, obviously, as I mentioned before, you would have to set manually that you give power to device component 1, device component 2, device component N, right? So a variation of what I've been telling. Now, yet another one. Multiple power supplies to a single device. Maybe in my rack, I want to have redundancy of power supply. So the power supply 1 comes from a different source than power supply 2, just to be sure. Again, I should know the relationship between who's giving power to this device in the middle. Now, let's come back to the green reference model. The conclusion so far is that next to the physical topology, we need to have two other topologies, the power source, to know who's monitoring what, and the control topology to know who's controlling what. So if you see in red in the drawing there are inventory capabilities, interface D, inventory of identity capabilities, interface A, and you've got also interface C with the APIs. Remember what I said, if you take the smart PDUs, there is no way to detect to which server in the rack you're giving power. It must be set manually. So, but to avoid double counting, we must have those relationships. To know how to play with the efficiency, we must have this relationship of control. So where is this going to happen? Well, when discussing with the authors, it might happen in interface A, C, and or D. But the point is that there's a question of the life cycle of all of these elements. Maybe to start with, you've got no relationship, and you need to have the API in the interface C to set the relationship I discussed, either in the controller or directly in the components. Typically, smart PDUs, you could set this information via APIs in the smart PDUs, and then you can query it later. So it might be interface C to start with, and maybe interface D, and in the end, maybe interface A. So the life cycle of how we're going to insert those elements is key. And in the last slide, I put a couple of definitions: power inlet, power outlet, power interface, energy object, power state, right? So when I mentioned on PoE that I could be going into a lower mode from my access point, this is the power state. This is what Tony Lee had in his Yang module, right? But also the metering relationship, the power source relationship. So the questions from the authors is that, are we going in the right direction with this framework concept? Before we continue editing, and we spend most of the time the last couple of days trying to get the drawing right to explain what we're doing. And the second question is that, do we agree that we must focus on the framework first in order to get those terms right? And obviously the concept behind those terms. Now the discussion whether those terms go in the framework or terminology, well, to be discussed. So with this, I propose to leave with that slide, or if you prefer, Rob, going back to your 3 questions and then get any feedback, question, answer, etc.
So I'll say questions for the working group first. Now's the chance.
Maybe the key question is, does it make sense to go with those relationships, with those terms before we continue editing? If it doesn't, let us know quickly.
Okay, so while the working group's considering this, I have some thoughts on this. I've got various thoughts and things. So I think some of what you've got here is important and is critical to get right. I think it is critical that we have to be able to deploy this in a gradual way where we take into account existing devices. So that's obvious. So whatever solution we come up with, I think that's needed. I think that some of the relationships that you've identified here between who's providing power and who's consuming it, I think that those relationships are important to be able to represent those where needed. I think in some cases they're not needed, as in it should be obvious. And I would like the simple cases to be simple. In the model we design, and this is going further in terms of the YAM models, I would like to be able to model the simple cases simply and still be able to model the more complicated models so it's sort of complete. So that would be my ideal goal, as should be anyone's. Try and make it as simple as possible. But I think it's important to identify some of those. Whether you need all of these, I don't know. I haven't thought about it clearly enough, but I definitely think that you're on the right direction here. But I think that whether you need all of this, I don't know. I think that the other thoughts I had was like for slide 9, you talked about control. And I had questions about as to whether that control relationship needs to be explicitly modeled in the data models or whether that is just knowledge that is given to the like the network controller knows the relationship between these devices, and hence it knows that it's got this particular router, and hence it needs to know, it knows that actually I'm going to have to program it here to turn off the power, or to have to program it there for that thing. So it wasn't clear to me as to whether that needs to be explicitly modeled and come out in the model. So I think there's definitely questions. I see Tony Lee's in the queue. So one other thing that I think is important coming back is this question is, can we do the framework afterwards? Can we do it? Do we have to do it before? I actually sort of think that we need to be working on the framework now. I think that's important. I do think at the same time, it's useful to start having discussions a bit about what the data models look like and what things we're counting. And those things, I think we can do it a bit in parallel, because I think that will help come up with a good solution rather than like a waterfall approach where we say, okay, we'll do the framework and now we'll start working the data models. I think we could do the two in parallel somewhat. And that'll help both refine the framework and refine the data models at the same time, is my thought. So they're going to comment on that otherwise.
Can I just answer quickly?
Yes.
We don't need all of this all the time. I fully agree. As a consequence, a simple case should not have all the complexity that we mentioned here with the different cases. You mentioned for relationship, maybe just the control knows that's sufficient. Well, it depends if you got a YANG module for the network wide or the network domain view, and then maybe this is required level 3 there, but not level 2. And yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Tony?
Thank you. I had a question about metering. You said that we should have metering relationships. Not everyone's going to install meters all over the place. Power meters are actually real hardware. They have real cost. A lot of people are going to shortcut that. How does this framework allow for that?
So this is somehow the same answer to Rob. I mean, if you've got this situation with a physical meter, you might need to have the metering relationship. In your case, whenever you are within a router, you don't need that. I believe that something like the old entity map for which there is a YANG module now would give you that the sensor is actually on that specific port and specific components or whatever. So you've got that information already built in your router. So I don't believe that in the case of a router, you should bother with all of these metering relationships.
Okay, so that means that a meter is allowed to produce a static value, a highly inaccurate value.
Why do you say that? What do you I was thinking the accuracy of the meter would be orthogonal to this discussion. No, maybe I didn't understand.
No, I think it's key to this discussion, or at least I won't. I'm concerned that you're precluding things in the framework. If you have things inside of the router and you want to expose them, you've got to provide some information. And that information, let's say you go with some static value, that's not going to be very accurate. Is that acceptable?
Static values.
For example, I happen to know that this particular interface and this particular kind of optics consumes 10 watts. But the reality is that it's running in low power mode, and I don't really know that. So it's actually consuming 8 watts. So I'm actually a little bit off.
All right, so maybe that's a distinction between like the data sheet that you expect to have 10 watts, but you're actually metering that and you've got 8.
I know Jan is, I just want to comment on this
Marcel,
accuracy
I
value.
can't hear you.
We addressed
I'm
that.
just going to mute. Benoit, you want to mute as well too?
Oh. Can you hear me?
No, there's an issue with your Marcel.
Can you
Marcel, there's an
hear
issue
me?
with your audio. I can't hear you. No, there's an issue with your Marcel. Marcel, there's an issue with your audio. I can't hear you.
I write it in the chat.
So, Tony, if your point is that on a theoretical basis it's supposed to be 10 watts, but you're actually metering that inside of your router, it's 8 watt. So to me, it's like not a physical meter like I have here, but actually within the device and component where I've got Y there, you've got a precise way, an accurate way to meter it. So sure, obviously it is in scope.
Okay, but what happens if I don't have that accurate way and I'm always reporting the data sheet value? Is that acceptable? Does that count as a valid metering relationship?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
May I
What is your
try to
expectation?
answer?
Please, Jan.
Yeah, so the way that we designed this framework, that's at least the way that I've been talking about, you could plug in a data sheet value. Of course you can. One of the important points with this framework is that instead of building in such assumptions into code, you would do that through sort of configuration, so that you can cover all these cases, and it would be transparent, so that they're looking at this tree of what is being counted and how it's counted, how it's being summarized and aggregated. That would actually show up there as, oh, there's a constant value coming in here. I think transparency is key for this sort of thing.
Is there any more questions? Do people understand the framework and its purpose? Is that clear from this presentation? Is more time required? I'm trying to think whether doing show of hands is useful now. I think what I would suggest is, because your draft, Benoit, all this updated version only came out a few days ago, things like that. We've got another interim planned in a month's time, so which is more details on the models. I would assume that this is probably going in the right sort of direction, is my personal view. If anyone thinks that's wrong, I think that it'd be good to speak up now. I know I've not done a show of hands. I'm not sure that this is useful at this point in time. And then I suggest that we then potentially have some more time to discuss this a bit further in a month's time, and then see if people had a chance to review it. It'd be nice if we got some discussion on the list on this as well, because I think this is useful. One of the key questions I had to me is like, in terms of this framework, is whether or not the data models have to be set around this, as in it's going to be like the device models required to use this framework, or whether they're groupings and you can use them within the framework or not. So that's not clear in my head. That would be useful, I think. Jan, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yes, one of the really basic key features of this framework is that it should be able to read data from anything. So of course you can use anything, or data sheets, or some other machine learning algorithm, whatever it is. That's key to this. You should be able to read from anything.
But and to Jan, is there a benefit though in terms of us designing models to for them to fit into this? Like, I mean, in terms of models, you can obviously define groupings and things that can be used in different ways in Yang, and you could have ones that fit within a framework on devices for this versus outside. Is that something that's important, or is that something that can be done laterally or separately?
When you know what the aggregation is going to do with your data, you can, of course, try to design interfaces that match that nicely. There's always a translation cost, as we all know, when there's a big model impedance, as we usually call it, between what a device is offering and what the aggregation layer on top is trying to make with that. So knowing what that looks like can be, certainly guide what you do on the device level too.
Okay.
But key is to be able to do anything with any device.
And then a last question, I think, Benoit, if there are other people interested in working on this with you, is that something the authors are open to having discussions with on that sort of thing? I know that sometimes keeping it small is helpful to make quicker progress, but having a wider group can sometimes be helpful. Do you have any thoughts on that? If people are interested, should they contact you or the other authors?
Right. So first of all, there is a GitHub repo in the draft. And then we've got regular calls to make progress. So everybody's welcome, obviously. Yes. So
okay,
let's contact the authors. Yes.
Okay. So right. So let's call it a close for that presentation now. I've gone over a little bit of time, but I think that's going to be okay in terms of the terminology discussion. And then my plan is that I'll move on to the next presentation, which I think I will give. How do I stop this? Okay, so move down here. So this is me presenting on behalf of the authors. Oops, I lost my screen. I'd like to say is I'm not involved. The authors are not involved in this document in any way, shape, or form. And other than having looked through the slides over the weekend, I don't know the details here. But I think they're fairly easy, and they raise some interesting points that are worth discussing. Let me just start a timer so I can just track that. Let's just put 15 minutes. So, so Carlos put together some slides for effectively looking at some of the terminology drafts that were there and some suggestions about how potentially we could move forward with that. I think there's some interesting discussions here on related to terminology. I think it'd be good generally today, as part of this wider terminology discussion, is to figure out which groups of people are going to work on this, how we get those people to work together, what we use as a base draft, etc. So I think that would be helpful. So I think, as Carlos pointed out, there's two different documents that are related to terminology. There's one from the Carlos's Pignataro one and the BCLP Green Terminology Draft. So they're both within scope of today's discussion. That's fine. And then he sort of ruled effectively in his slides, he said for another time, is these metric documents and things like that. A couple of these are expired. And the last one, an ID exists for metrics. I think, again, that's an interesting question. I don't necessarily think that metrics are out of scope today in terms of, I think it would be useful to understand, again, whether we want a terminology document and a separate metrics document, or whether the metrics end up as being part of the Yang models, or whether they come to one document. So I think that that those are sort of in scope in terms of how we progress and move forward here. However, none of those have been presented today. And this is a more concrete list of data model IDs, and the plan is to sort of discuss these in more detail in a month's time, things like that, and make some progress towards concrete data models as well. So those, again, not being presented today. So this is sort of the key point, and maybe Carlos would have more details here. Is so he's comparing the two documents. He's saying that effectively that the terminology section of draft Pignataro is about 11 pages. It defines 40 definitions. He's questioning whether the ones related to environmental considerations in CO2 are too much. And again, I think that they're probably out of scope of the working group, but he's suggesting that the ones related to energy and power are quite comprehensive and useful. So he thinks that that might be a good starting base. Anything to do with environmental sustainability, I think he sort of sees that as being out of scope. I would probably agree with him that is out of scope for the Green Working Group, so we shouldn't pull those in. And then he's just very high level compared that to draft BCLP green terminology. And he says in the terminology section, you've got abbreviations and definitions in section 2 and 3, defining 12 definitions. He says the energy ones are coming from RFC 7326. He's rated that as a negative. I don't know why. Whether he thinks that they need to be updated. The energy ones, maybe there is some things that have changed over time. But again, I think where we can reuse terminology, if it hasn't changed, I think that's a good thing. And again, efficiency, he thinks those are useful and comprehensive. So he thinks those are useful. And then it has some sample metrics and measurement methods, and he's regarding those as out of scope because he thinks other SDOs are covering those by looks of things, but I don't know any more details from that. And then his proposal is to create a new combined draft, and he's suggesting that's putting together these bits of information with combining the authors and choosing 2 editors to try and drive those forward. And that's certainly one possibility. I think it'd be useful. Hopefully we can make some progress today in terms of trying to see what a way forward is here, but that is one option effectively to define those moving forward. It's worth saying, and I'll probably mention later on, that other choices are to do a beauty contest between the 2 drafts as a starting point. Maybe, so Diego and I discussed potentially doing like a design team for some of this work, whether that's needed for here, but sometimes that could be a useful way to get people together to focus on a starting point. So that's what he's suggesting. And that's it. So opening up any questions here, noticing I can't actually answer. I can give my views on things. I can't actually answer on behalf of what Carlos was thinking. Peter may know a bit more. I don't know.
Well, actually, I'm here to listen to what Carlos would like to, present, or what exactly his ideas are. So I'm not sure.
Benoit, so you've got hopefully some comments or questions on this approach.
It's just one observation, so it doesn't need your answer, Rob. So you're good. So the minus next to copy from RFC 7326 from EMAN. I observed something this morning while reviewing this. There are about 5 definitions which are in the terminology draft, and they are referenced as coming from EMAN, but it's confusing because they changed a little bit. So this is maybe where the minus come from. At least that's something I would like to relate to the mailing list, because as you said, if the definitions are good, then they're good. If they're not good, you have new ones, but you'd like to understand what's wrong. So it's a little bit of a mix of everything. Just an observation, and I couldn't do that. I could mention that on the mailing list if you want.
Yeah, so that would be really helpful to mention on the list. I'm keen to try and drive more discussion. We have very little discussion on the main list, so I think that would be great. I completely agree with where you're coming from, Benoit, is that I think that if the terms are being used and modified from RFC 7326, then the document needs to be really clear that they are sourced from that, but have different definitions. So that is critical, because otherwise you get a lot of confusion if it's implying that it's just taking a definition and actually changing its meaning in some way. Even the definition change is quite subtle. So yes, that's a good comment. Thank you. Are there any other comments on this presentation? Okay, then we'll move on to the next one. So the next presentation is this one. Was it Jen Chen? Were you presenting on this?
Yeah,
Let me
I can present this.
I will hand you over control just a moment. I just need to find the right buttons. Okay. Right, you should now have slide control.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I will present this slides on behalf of Qin and other authors. The topic is about the terminology for energy efficiency network management. So here's some simple recap. It has been presented in the last two IETF meetings in Dublin and Bangkok, and also several open issues have been tracked in the GitHub. Is there capability discovery related terminology, and adding some additional terms, and also some potential new terms such as energy consumption. So the main motivation for this terminology, it has been highlighted in blue color here. So the first one is defining terms and definitions related to energy efficiency metrics. And the definitions in existing RFCs will be reused. So these are from the charter part of the green WG. And also the main thing is to define the common terminology and categorize various types of metrics and measurements at different levels. So the main goal, there are three parts. The first part is to define a set of terms to be used within IETF when discussing energy efficiency networks. So this document will not intend to define a complete comprehensive list of all the terms such as sustainability in general. So it will only cover the definitions in the scope of the charter, and only key terms will be defined here. And some of the terms are extracted from existing documents from IETF or other standard organizations beyond. And secondly, it's aimed to provide and measurement methods to assess or calculate energy-related consumptions, energy efficiency issues, etc. So just now with the previous slides, I saw there's some suggestions and comments that this is out of scope. So this can be furtherly discussed after this presentation, I guess. And also, it would like to assist in the development of young data models at different levels and bring clarity to the energy efficiency related discussions. And lastly, for the inventory of the standard organizations, it's just to try to check the consistency of our proposed terms. So in the future, it could be moved, that's for sure. Okay, so just now in the previous presentation, it's mentioned that 12 terms are defined, but currently it has been updated to 15 terms. So in the following slides, they will be checked quickly one by one. Okay, for the existing terminologies related to energy and power, for energy it's kilowatt hours measurement in measurement, and for power it's the time rate which energy is emitted, transferred, or received. So it's expressed in watts. And also for energy management, it's a set of functions for measuring, modeling, planning, and optimizing networks to ensure that the network and attached devices use energy efficiently and appropriately. And for energy monitoring, is part of the energy management deals with collecting and reading information. And for energy control, is part of energy management that deals with directing influence over devices. So these are all from existing standards. And here are some new terminologies related to energy efficiency, such as energy efficiency network management, its ability to control the use of available energy in an optimized manner in a network. And energy efficiency metric refers to a metric that's used for the evaluation of the consumption of a network device or component for different levels. And these metrics can also be used for network performance to characterize the effectiveness of energy efficient management strategy. Okay, and some more new terminologies such as energy efficiency ratio. So this is a ratio between useful output and the input of an energy conversion process of different levels. And such as for a router, it could be stated as a ratio of total throughput to the total power consumed. And also for infrastructure such as data center, so important terms like power usage effectiveness. And this could be calculated as a ratio between the total energy consumed by the infrastructure and the energy needed for the network elements or components. Okay, and also energy efficiency. So providing useful outputs with as little energy as possible, eliminating the energy waste, etc. And another new added one, energy efficiency capabilities. And this is to optimize the energy usage in the network components devices or across the network through configurable static attributes such as power saving capable attributes or power setting attributes which could be operated to provide a different level of power or power state, different setting of temperature, voltage, other settings, etc., so as to optimize the energy usage. Okay, so and also there's different levels for energy efficiency, such as network level, device level, component level. So this is quite obvious. And here's some terms analysis. So some of the terms they have been stated in this draft already. So it's been referenced and covered right now in this presenting draft as well. And for this energy saving conservations is not covered yet. So what's the next step? Maybe that's all for this presentation. Comments and suggestions. Thank you.
Benoit, do you want to go?
Right, thank you for the presentation. Can you please go to slide number 9 on energy efficiency? So the second sentence means switching to more efficient power supplies and silicon, or developing more efficient transmission or signal processing algorithm. So to me, they are just examples, and I believe there should be mentioned as example. We might have different ways. Now, there is something which I don't see in there, which is like changing to a different power state. This one, changing to different power state, let's say hibernate or low energy mode or you name it, is mentioned on the slide 11, which is in the energy efficiency capabilities, right? Then you mentioned power saving capable attributes. So why is this in the capabilities here and not as an extra example 2 slides before in energy efficiency? And again, I know that if you don't know how to answer, I could mention that to the mailing list, right?
Okay, so I guess it's just we stated several examples here for energy efficiency because the approaches could be abundant, so it's not some kind of enumeration here. That's why. But if you know, we think it's important, we can add this in the term definition.
What will be abandoned? The second sentence or the entire
Yeah,
definition?
I mean, you know, I mean, there's a lot of approaches to fulfill this energy efficiency. So many approaches. So maybe except this beyond this a power state thing, there's other you know other approaches as well. So do we need to enumerate all these approaches here?
All right. I realize that not all the authors are attending this meeting, and maybe that the question of that whether we need 2 terminology documents. But I didn't hear at least you or anyone else mention if you are willing to work with Carlos on collapsing the 2 sets of terminology documents into one. I have a couple of editors that are managing that one document, so we don't have to look at a couple of sets of documents just for terminology. That's just a suggestion.
So before I address Mahesh's question, I have some comments on this. So actually, this energy efficiency slide. So I think one of the interesting things here, and I don't know what other people's thoughts are on this, is whether this is something that you can actually sensibly measure. So I can understand how on a network you could say, okay, I can see what its energy consumption is on day 1, and then I make some changes to the network, whatever those happen to be, I can measure its energy usage like a week or 2 weeks time and see that the energy usage has gone down, and hence I can say, well, I infer if traffic is the same between those 2 days, or roughly the same, that you've had this benefit in terms of energy efficiency. But otherwise, I'm concerned that if we're generating metrics or reporting for energy efficiency, that those be very easy to game. So it's very easy to say, oh, well, my line card would be running at this mode, but I'm gaining this benefit by putting in lower power mode. I'm then saving this energy. So I think it's something we need to be really careful with in terms of generating metrics or trying to measure energy efficiency, rather than just saying, define what energy efficiency is, and say, well, actually measuring that is outside the scope of what we're trying to achieve. We're just trying to achieve reporting what's the actual energy used by a network at a given point in time, and allowing other people to generate those metrics and comparisons outside of this framework. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or whether other working participants have thoughts on that question.
Yeah, I guess here energy efficiency is more like you know, to the clarification to facilitate the discussions between different people about energy, how to optimize the energy usage. So for metrics, you know, we have this energy efficiency ratio. We have other metrics as well to, you know, to clarify the results, how efficiency it is. But here, I think we cannot, in this definition, to enumerate all the metrics.
Okay. And then another question I had was, you had a term for energy efficient network management, and that term I think could be very easily misconstrued in terms of it might mean that people are thinking that the network management itself is more efficient, as in using less servers to drive network management, rather than the management of making your network more energy efficient. So I think we need to be very careful with that term. And maybe in terms of how it's phrased, because I think the naive interpretation of it could be quite different from what people might expect.
Mm-hmm.
We've got still 10 minutes this. I gave you a bit of extra time because of, do any other people have any comments on these terms? Otherwise, I might poll for some questions on this particular document. Right, so I'm going to ask. So I wanted to see whether people think there's some useful terms here. Mahesh?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if it's worth considering the question of do we need one or two.
Mahesh, I can't hear you, sorry.
Sorry. Are you able to hear me now?
You've still got a lot of background noise. You're very, I don't know if there's a fan or something in the background. You're very quiet. Right, so do you think this document contains some useful terms that should be considered? And by that, I mean, do you think that this document contains some terms that would be useful and should be incorporated in a terminology document?
Yeah, I think currently all these
We've lost audio from you, Junchen.
so maybe we could consider them all, or some of them we just as you mentioned just now, maybe we need some more clarification and be careful with the definition to make it more clear.
And to be clear, I haven't got the chat as well. I know. So to be clear from this poll, I'm not saying that all the terms are useful. I'm saying that there's some useful terms here, rather than all. So there seems to be pretty positive here. Could the one person's voted no, as in they don't think any of these terms are useful? Would they be willing to come to the mic line and comment on that? Because I think that'd be useful to understand. Go ahead, Tony.
So that would be me. I would prefer that we do work and then determine what terms we need.
Okay, to clarify, give a bit more color to your comment, you're sort of saying it would be helpful. We should work on the data models, and from those data models, we'll work out exactly what terms are needed, and hence we define those terms that are required.
Exactly.
Okay. And just to give a reply to that, Tony, I think that what I was hoping is that we would try and do these things in parallel. I think some of these defining some base terms is helpful. I do agree that we shouldn't try and just make up a load of terms that we think are interesting or potentially useful, because ultimately, if we're not using those terms, I don't think we should be defining them. So I do think there is some element of that. Okay, so that's a reasonable one. I'm going to ask the same question of Carlos's document. Okay, so I'm not sure I've written this very well. So do you think that draft Bignotero green env sus terminology contains some useful terms? And specifically what I mean here is, do you think that that draft contains useful terms that are not in this existing one? The draft BLCP green terminology. There's another show of hands. So. Just give a bit more time. Okay, so I should have summarized the previous one, but just to summarize this one, my interpretation is that there's either no opinion, as in people may not have read that draft, or that they think that possibly it contains some definitions that might be useful, but nothing particular. And there's some that don't think there's anything useful in there. Whereas actually, to summarize the previous poll, there seems to be quite strong consensus, at least amongst the people who are attending today, that has useful terms that we should be working towards. Okay, so Benoit, yeah.
Right, so to explain it a little bit why I put it this way is that I'm somehow with Tony here. In the first one, yes, there are some, the first draft, there are interesting terms. In the second one, I don't want to say they're not interesting, but when I look at all of these, I mean, there are pages and pages of terms, and it seems to me like, okay, this is like a little bit of wishful thinking, right? I see climate change, I see climate change adaptation. Is there anything to do about those terms in this working group? So, and I'm not sure. So I'm wondering, what's the point to define, to specify all these terms if we're not going to use them?
Okay, that makes sense to me. As in, I equally agree that I think it would be much better to start off with a small set of terms that we know we want to use and are useful, and then to add extra terms going forward as we need to. So I think that'd be useful. So I think it feels to me that there's more support around green terminology, draft BCLP green terminology 01 as potentially a good starting point for the working group. I don't want to make any sort of decision here and now. I want to discuss it with Diego, and probably we need to sort of also discuss this on list as well. But it seems like that this might be a better starting point, this draft, in terms of terminology. I do think that some of these terms will need further work, and it'd be good to try and have reviews and try and refine those before we adopt the document, because I think that one of the points that Adrian made previously, that it's useful to try and get agreement and consensus as the terms are going in, and that once they're in a document, it sort of gets harder to then change them. So I think that would be useful. So I think that'll stop it in terms of this presentation slot. So we've still got quite a lot of time here, 45 minutes left. I think that there's some choices here in terms of what we can do. I had a slide deck just to have some suggestions here. I'm not sure whether we make progress on this in terms of how we go forward, but I will open it up. Basically some discussion points effectively around this terminology draft. So the first one I had was a discussion on how we make progress. Do we do a draft beauty contest, which is sort of what I've done there? Do the authors try and work together? Do we do a design team for this? So that's the first question I have. A separate question I had is whether definitions of metrics should be in one draft or separate draft. We haven't even discussed metrics today, so I don't know if we'll know with that. My question was, can we essentially reuse terms from the EMAN work? Are there terms that we can learn from that and use them? But I had questions of making sure that we don't introduce too much complexity. I think one thing I'm keen for this work is that we try and solve the simple case in a simple way. I had questions that not necessarily related to terminology, but more to do with the models we eventually reuse from EMAN, or what we can reuse is that does Yang allow us to give simpler solutions, i.e. identities allow us to define some simple power levels, power states, but then still the way you can extend identities means that you can have more flexibility. Do we need any sort of categorization of terms and metrics? I think that will come over time, depending on what we end up defining. And then the last choice is, if we've got time here, we could define specific term text in this interim. Another thought in terms of the time is, if we don't want to do that, is we can spend further time discussing the framework if people think that would be useful. So what do people think would be most useful thing to discuss now? Let me just take myself out of the queue. Marisol.
Can you hear me now?
Not very well.
Or still no? I give it a try. If not, the other authors from the framework can comment. But we are planning to have a hackathon in Madrid just to showcase of the framework and looking basically more.
Marisol, I think it'd be better to put your message into the chat. Certainly, I can't understand your question.
So if I'm connected to Marisol, so she's trying to say, confirm this on the chat, Marisol, but there will be a hackathon at the next IETF in Madrid about trying to avoid the double counting that we mentioned in the framework. This is what she wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. I just noticed the chat. So Mahesh had a question I wanted polled was, do we need one or two documents for terminology? And you want to ask to poll that. So Mahesh, I'm just going to put you on the spot first. My assumption would be we'd only want one document for terminology. Is there a specific idea as to why you think we might need two, or are you just trying to act as a forcing function to get us down to a single document? I mean, I can poll if you think that'd be useful. Mahesh, you there still?
Sorry, I was having some audio issues. Was there a question?
Yes, your audio is also not great from my side. So you put a question in the chat was, do we need one or two, we want to poll for one or two documents of terminology? As an AD, I can obviously do that poll for you if you want me to. My instinct here is, my question is, I'm not sure why we would need more than one terminology document. So that would be my assumption, is that we'd only want one to adopt for the working going forward. Do you have any thoughts or reasons as to why you think we might want more than one? Or was it just as a way to try and help the working group make progress towards one document?
Hopefully the audio is a little better. My question was exactly the same, which is, do we need two documents, or should we have one? And then the follow-on question, of course, is which is a good document to be the basis to conversion.
Okay, and so I think that I don't think we need to. I don't want to poll because for that, because I think that I expect the answer is we only need one document. Even Carlos was suggesting that. I don't think anyone suggested we have more than one. So I think that that's okay. In terms of how we make progress, I think at the moment we'll try and take that to the list for today, because I need to discuss it with Diego. I can't make any decisions here. Probably we'll try and force some discussion onto the working list and see if one of these is just the starting point, or whether the authors can get together if they think that's a way forward. So I think that would be the way that we discuss that. Is there any more? Does anyone else want to discuss these points on this draft? Sorry, this slide. Does anyone think it would be useful to discuss specific text of the terms in today's interim? Because we've still got roughly 35 minutes left. Nobody's speaking up. Okay, so I think Benoit.
Just to help you, because you're the only chair, right? So interestingly, I believe that we're missing a couple of key authors in this call. I know what's happening this time, but if you want to discuss the terms, we need at least to have those people who've been writing those terms, right? So to me, yes, we could discuss. It might be best to just start discussion on the mailing list.
Yes, I mean, Carlos was meant to be presenting and dropped out at the last minute, so that was unfortunate. But yes, so I think we will try and drive discussion on the mailing list here. But and again, I can't see easily from who's voting that, in terms of whether it's just like the set of authors that are voting for particular solutions and things as well. So yes, I think that would make sense. I think that we've probably got as far as we can do here. I think I've got a good read of where the working group's feeling in terms of these documents. I suggest, given the time, that we maybe go back and spend a bit more time in the framework discussion. Benoit, if you are happy to spend some time on that today, is that something you're willing to do, or do you want to call that a day as well?
Perfectly fine to do so. Yeah.
Then I think that would be useful, and I'll try and I might do some polls on that to see. So I'm going to just switch the slides back. Let's so I'm going to actually I can do it from here. So let's go to the questions that I have, because I think that this one I will poll for some. So the questions that I asked effectively at the beginning to the authors, I want to see if the working group has any thoughts on these questions. So what I'll do is a poll for the sort of 3 questions that I had there is, so does the working group believe that a framework is, I'll say important here. So so my question is, does the working group feel framework is important. And by that I mean specifically an energy efficiency specific framework rather than a general network management framework. As in, should this be something that that the working group needs to be specifying? Emil, yep.
Yep. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm sorry for the delay. I was on another call and can't escape. So we have been working on the use cases, on the requirement, on the framework. We removed the requirement and then we removed the framework. And now we are back with the framework document. And I think there are good reasons for that. And I see two axes. The first is that the EMAN history is not here for nothing. They did that because there was a big need on the need of defining, you see, the architecture, the terminology, and so on. And we were not able to, at the beginning of the Green Working Group, to understand how and why we are going to integrate EMAN works. And I think now we got it because we need to have a view larger than the monitoring interfaces that we are currently using. We cannot do all we need with only young interfaces because we have PDU devices that are using SNMP or CLI or API. And we have to manage things like you see onboarding legacy devices to count the current consumption from the datasheet and to be able later to show what's the gain to add new components that support the green interfaces. And for telco, this is crucial because the goal is to manage power, but is to show the effort on the results. If we are not able to show the diff between before now on in 3 years, the value for us is much lower. And so to illustrate that, we added I added one use case about you see the double counting. Because if we don't if we don't have a common approach, I mean broader than the data modeling, we will not be able to detect and to manage double counting of the power. That's my view.
Okay, so just on the use cases document. So you presumably weren't here in the call when I was discussing that early on.
No, I was not at the beginning of the call. I arrived 3/4 later.
Okay, fine. So we did discuss that briefly at the beginning of the call, and I think the conclusion was that the authors would try and update the document hopefully over the next sort of 2 or 3 weeks, ideally with some time so that the working group participants can have another chance to sort of review the updated use cases before IETF 123. And I'm hoping that the chairs, I'm hoping effectively that we can then do another adoption poll, get some more reviews, and get that adopted, because I think I feel that the chairs would like to see the use cases document adopted and to be able to judge consensus that we think that we're sort of addressing the right use cases, and we've got those, and we agree what that set of those is. In addition to that, and if you look at the slide decks I shared, there was a comment or suggestion from Carlos Bernardos about a way of structuring the use cases in terms of a general description, what's sort of green specific to that use case, and then maybe also requirements. I was a bit more iffy as to whether that's needed or useful, but I think again, having them all structured the same way, making it very clear what the specific impact of green is useful, because again, that might help you find out if there's use cases that are adjacent to the green working group, as in it's using the technology but don't put any specific requirements on what we're trying to do. So I think that was the proposal for the next steps, and I think Marisol said that she would ideally try and do that, or the author, or speak on behalf of the authors, that they would try and do that update, if that sounds okay.
Yes, this is not an issue, because we already agreed to use a template to harmonize, you see, the wording on the reading. But it's just a matter of having, you see, the list of the entries in the template, and then to revert the use cases. So,
and I think I think it'd be good just to have that. I mean, we want more reviews, and certainly an editorial pass over the document as it was would be useful as well, because there's just to improve some of the English in places. I know it's not intended to go to RFC, so it doesn't need perfection or anything like that, but in some cases, just tidy it up would be good, because I know during the adoption poll, we didn't really have that many reviews of document beyond the authors, and there's one person who was sort of pushing back on the document, saying, look, it needs more reviews, which is a fair enough criticism and comment. So I think that would be good, and then we can get the work, hopefully get the working group to adopt and move forward with that as adopted document, and then that would help move the work forward. Okay.
Actually, I don't know if Marisol recalls that, but we have a call mostly every 2 weeks. So we will address that very quickly.
Okay. So go back to this poll. Does the working group believe that a framework is important? So I see quite strong support in terms of the people here that's yes. Again, one person's voted no. Would that person, if they're still here, be willing to comment, come to the mic and just explain why? That would be helpful. Now, Tony.
Yes, it's again me. Again, I think we should be doing things in parallel and find out if we actually need a framework. If we are simply just going to do modeling, why do we need a framework?
So I guess from my perspective, I think a framework is just defining the structure of how the models fit together, how they represent the data. So whether it's a framework, whether it's expanded sort of use case / requirements, whether it goes into the data model, I think is a different question. But I think this is just a way of documenting one of the sort of key requirements and what the impact that is my opinion on this. Okay, but I think one of your questions, or I was going to ask these other two questions, so maybe that will give some more indication. So I'm going to now ask actually the third question first. So do you think that the framework would impact the design of the Yang models? Yeah, go on, Benoit.
Go, Benoit.
So actually, it depends. Do we speak about the device model or the domain level model? That's a big distinction. And to come back to Tony's point, if we just do modeling of a device, maybe we don't need that. We don't need all this complexity, and we don't need a framework. But there is more stuff that are important at the domain level. Right, so hopefully we're going to have the same groupings of the places, right? But what is your question?
Well, I was thinking of device initially, but then actually our work is covering. I'll probably poll for them separately because in Charter I understand the work to cover both network level and device level Yang models. So I'll ask specifically for device models first. So the question is, do you think that a framework would or should impact the design of device Yang models related to energy efficiency and energy monitoring? just give a little bit more time for people to vote. Okay, so so my read of this is people aren't quite sure, as in they don't know. They think there's a mix of people that they will or they won't for device level YAM models. And I think for me that gives an indication that trying to do the device level models at least at the same time as developing a framework would be a sensible strategy. That's just my interpretation of that. So I'm going to close that one. I'm going to ask the same poll for controller / network wide. So if I can paste. And we're going to do controller and network together. So whether people think that a framework would have an impact on the design of the controller or network YAM models. Yeah.
On the previous question, I was answering no opinion because I didn't really understand how to interpret the question. I don't think that we should. I don't think that we should mandate what the device level models should look like. Mostly because there's already a million models out there, and we have them. So you can do whatever you want on the device. But to try to standardize before we know what the customer, so to speak, the controller wants from a device sounds like a little bit premature. So I think doing them separately or in the wrong order, in my opinion, device first and then controller sounds like we're not going for the optimal solution.
Okay, and just to clarify what I was meaning by the question I was trying to ask was that my question is basically whether having a framework drives that you have to model the device level models a particular way, or it's more efficient to model them a particular way, or whether it's sort of not related or not connected, as in it doesn't really matter too much. So that was the question I was trying to drive towards. So at least here for this poll, got a very strong consensus that we do think a framework would impact the design at the controller network level. So that's fairly clear. So that's good. The last question I'm going to ask is, can we basically work on these in parallel, or should we work? And actually, I'm going to say, I said, so any level, right? So my last question is, should we work on YAM models any level? So both, I mean by that device or controller or network wide in parallel to a framework. So I'm really trying to find out is, can we progress these in parallel, or do we believe that we have to get a framework defined first before we do any YAM models? Jan, are you still in the queue?
Bother you all again, but I think we can work in parallel, but I don't think that we can conclude this before the other. Is that something we can?
And that's
can
fine.
we put that into the question too in some way? Otherwise, I don't know what to answer here.
Well, I can just say verbally that I don't think there's any requirement that we conclude anything. I think it would be fairly clear that if we work on these things in parallel, we should get sort of direction as to whether there's a dependency, as in we can't finalize the data models for like devices until we know that the framework is set. I think it would be fairly clear as we do the work.
Okay, I'll vote yes then.
Okay. Now, so fine. So I think, so my reading again is that we think they can work in parallel, which is good. That's what I would certainly like to do. I think that also supports what Diego and hopefully what Mahesh is thinking as well. Mahesh, hopefully you'll come to the queue if you disagree. I won't poll on whether people think that this framework document is a good starting point as a framework, because I think that's too premature. It's only been out for a few days, so it hasn't had enough time, and it is evolving fairly quickly, I think. So I would encourage people, as I asked earlier on, if people are interested in trying to work with the authors on that, then please reach out to Benoit or the other authors and see if they can participate. Mahesh, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I wasn't going to jump in to disagree as such with what you just said. Just a comment to what Jan mentioned. For devices that are new, that probably don't need the legacy framework, I can see that the device model that Tony is suggesting can proceed. For legacy devices, I do agree that we may need to think about a framework to support those legacy devices.
Okay. Tony?
Mahesh, could you please say more? Why do we need a framework to describe a device that already exists?
Sorry, say that again, Tony.
I was asking if you could add more explanation why we need a framework for existing devices.
So, no, in fact, if anything, I said for devices that today can report energy metrics, if anything, I said we don't necessarily need a framework. Maybe what Jan is suggesting is that for legacy devices that don't have that capability, a framework needs to be defined.
Yeah, do you want to reply?
Sure. I mean, of course, we need a framework for legacy devices that don't behave the way they would like them to. But I would argue that we need a framework also for the newer devices, because there's lots and lots of going on the aggregation level. How do you combine this? How do you know what is being measured? We need transparency in the controller level and upwards. Do we see a graph here, but what's the data that's being graphed? What's it coming from? What's included? We don't have that. We have lots and lots of demos showing graphs today, but we seldom know what they are actually showing. So having a standardized way of seeing or expressing what's included and be able to redefine that even in runtime, we understand we have to measure this way instead, so we can change that instead of hard coding it in some opaque code that nobody is able to describe. I think it's important that we are coming together and figuring out the rules for how we aggregate and draw conclusions from this data.
Yeah, so sorry, jumping in again. So Jan, what I said specifically was the device level models that for devices that are able to support. For network, you're right, that probably we do need a framework definition.
So we've got 50 minutes left. Does anyone have any more comments on this sort of framework discussion now? Otherwise, I'll move on to sort of the closing slides. Now's the last chance. I'll try and summarize. Emil?
Yeah, I think a framework is really needed to be sure that we are not doing a double counting of the power consumption. It's something that, because it doesn't happen, I mean, the double accounting happen at different devices. And so we need way to avoid that. Because I don't think someone will deploy a solution that is not able to manage this situation. So it means that it covers more than one device. So that's it.
Tony, if you want to reply back to that, or it's a different question.
Yeah, double counting is not that big an issue. If you simply define the device model so that you have components that don't include their children, then it's very straightforward. And you can define that in the device model.
But isn't the tricky thing is that in some cases you can't do that, as in you can't always have the components reporting their power levels, because they might not have that, may not have any interface, they may not have any management interface, so that's not possible. But I'm not disputing that it's not necessarily a problem that isn't that tricky to fix, as in you could always report a given component that's reporting energy usage. It can also report if it's reporting on behalf of another component, it just has to name what the component is.
If you can't break down the hierarchy of components, then yes, you report everything at the top level. This is not that confusing.
But but I think it's like some of the examples that Benoit was giving, where you may have, like, I don't know, phones plugged into a PoE switch or something. Then it depends on whether those phones are able to report their power or not. Whether that switch is also reporting its power consumption effectively is also incorporating those phones. And if you don't get that right, then you'll end up adding up twice. So that's the obvious thing that needs to be solved.
Be explicit in the model. This is not hard.
But the model itself won't, there's nothing going to be specific about phones in the model, I don't think. I think the model is going to be more generic about components. And so this sort of case could easily arise, and hence the data model needs to be very specific about what do you do in that case and how it's reported.
So in your question, which model? The one from the switch PoE port or the one from the phone? Right, so it means that it needs to be at the network level. At the domain level. So the device level cannot have all the information.
It's very simple, okay? The phone reports its power usage. Okay, the controller or the switch reports its power usage, right? It's very, very clear what one is supplying and one is consuming.
Why? Now, if I put a smart PDU, you've got no way to know that I put a server at that specific power outlet of the smart PDU. There is no way to know this automatically. You need to set it up, right, in an API in a smart PDU, and you might be doing mistakes there.
I don't know what you mean by a smart PDU, but PDU is a packet data unit, also known as a packet. But okay, back in the real world, you know, we can define our devices and each device reports what it's doing. And it's very clear if there's overlap or not.
Okay, Emil, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think this will be an excellent discussion on the list. I think there's a problem here to be solved. If Tony thinks it's not required, then that'd be good to understand what the disagreement is. So I think that would be a useful discussion point. And it may just be coming down to whether you constrain the solution space to particular sets of devices, i.e. devices that are able to report their own power or not. But I think there are certainly other cases where we need to have some level of flexibility in the model, has the ability to have that flexibility, is my opinion. So I think that'd be a good issue for discussion. I was going to sort of just move on to summarizing though. I think this is a good point. So it's got one slide effectively. So just trying to think back of my conclusions today, I think we made progress in knowing what the next steps are for the use cases document and things, and we're waiting the authors to give an update on that. I think we've made progress on the terminology discussion, as in it feels like there's more consensus on the basis, or one of the drafts is potentially a better starting point than the other, we've not made progress on how we should take those forward. I think that needs to come on the list, and we need the other authors to be involved in those discussions. So the plan was to take that discussion to the list. I think that we had useful discussion on the framework document. I think it was thank you, Benoit, for presenting, and the other authors for bringing that document together. I think there's more clarity within the working group as to what the purpose of a framework document is, what problems it's trying to solve, and why that is potentially useful. So I think that is good. And my proposal for the next steps is at least Karen trying to update that framework document, try and get, hopefully people can review that document and discuss it and make sure that again, they agree whether it's required, what the issues are, and hopefully we'll have some time to discuss it in the next interim. I was also pleased to see that certainly there was some discussion thinking we can make progress on the data models in parallel. That's something I would like to see. And so the next interim meeting, which is in roughly a month's time, Monday, June 16th, the focus will be on the data models is the plan. But again, we'll give a little bit of time to the framework, and maybe even if there's any updates to either use cases or terminology, then again, we can allocate a bit of time there. But I would like to make some more progress with data models and try and see if we can get some sort of concrete traction towards how we progress those, and that's both data models at device level and potentially controller and network level. So I would encourage people, please, to try and review those existing drafts. There's quite a few data model drafts, to send comments to the list on those and review those, because then driving that discussion will help then make another work group to make sort of more progress more quickly. So I think that would be useful. Do you want to butt in, Mahesh, or do you happy for me to wait until?
No, I'm more than happy to wait.
Okay, so I'll just go through. So we've got IETF 123 in July coming up. I don't know how far away that is now, just a little bit less than 2 months, maybe 8 weeks or something. So we've requested 2 slots, 3 hours in total. So again, our plan will be to try and progress all of these things. Hopefully we can get certainly some of these documents towards adoption. That would be nice as starting points. I think that'll help focus the working group. In terms of future interim plans, the current plan for the authors still need to confirm dates with Mahesh and things, will be to try and have between 1 and 3 interims between each plenary meeting. I think the next one with the summer in the way might make it harder in terms of what the timings are. And again, we'll probably try and keep this same time slot and the same sort of third Monday of the month, but we can repoll if that's difficult for people. So that's the plan, and then we'll try and focus discussions on particular aspects. It may be that some of these interims, as some of these documents get more adopted, that we can then have more detailed discussions, and not everyone's required. So we'll see. And then, as I emphasized before, getting some discussion on the list and reviews of the list would be really helpful. At the moment, it seems like all the discussion is happening within the interim meetings, which is fine, but it's just like we'll make quicker progress and get to more consensus so we can have discussion on the list as well. And I've made a comment here, is the chairs considering where their focus design team may be helpful. That's still an open question. I'm not sure at the moment whether it is. And then there's any other business. So Mahesh, do you want to now jump in and comment on?
Yeah, I was just butting in to kind of second your comment, which is we really need more discussion on the mailing list to really move these documents forward. So now that Benoit has posted his updated document, and hopefully the terminology folks will get together to produce a document. I'd like to get more feedback from the working group.
Okay, thank you, Mahesh. Any other business? Does anyone else have any other comments or suggestions? Now's the time. I don't see any. So otherwise, yeah, thank you everyone for contributing and participating. Thank you, Peter, and others who are collecting notes. That's been brilliant, because I've not had time to do that today. So that has helped me a lot and things like that. So it's really appreciated those who've contributed. Thanks everyone for the discussion and the participation. So, and we will speak to you again in a month's time, and see you in Madrid.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rob. See you guys.